Let me first dispel any fear that I have the slightest interest, or that any member of my caucus has the slightest interest in hurting the economy of this state. I'm going to the Final Four. My friends are going to the Final Four. My friends from out of state are coming here. We don't want that. It makes it hard for me to even get up here and speak. But we have a duty as Democratic elected officials to tell what we know and to lay it out. And I intend to do that. And I hope you will bear with me. Let's get a couple things clear. The financial pressure, if that's what it is, the economic pressure that's on this state because of this issue is far from over. I will read you a quote from today's Financial Times. It is the world's leading economic newspaper. It's the Wall Street Journal of the world, okay? They have a long article about Indiana's struggle with religious freedom, and they have a quote that they put in highlights and italics because it was so important. It's from Professor Katz at Indiana University Law School. He's talking about this proposed amendment here, or change. He said, "This may put out the fire that the legislature started by enacting the Religious Freedom Restoration Act in its original form." So this may put out the fire from passing the bill, but it doesn't solve the ultimate problem, which is that discrimination against gays and lesbians is perfectly lawful at the state level in Indiana. I sat in the back of the room this morning when business person after business person came to the microphones and explained how they liked this fix, but they all said to a person that this was the first step in a path towards full protection for sexual orientation and sexual identity, to a person. But neither the Speaker nor the President pro tem concurred in that. Nor was there any commitment that this body would be allowed to hear a bill next year on extending that protection. That needs to be said, and that needs to be done. And it will not be a pleasant discussion. And that's not coming because some lobbyist for some fringe group wants us to do it. It's because the world has changed. Do you think for a moment that I grew up in a family that even knew what gay liberation was? I've moved. The world has moved. And happily, the Hoosier population has moved. And we need to address it. The Speaker said, quite accurately, that we have not created a protected class. That's a fancy way of saying we're not protecting gays and lesbians on a statewide basis because of their sexual orientation or identity. We've chosen not to do that. All we're saying is in this proposed resolution or amendment or whatever you even call this thing is that no one can use RFRA to excuse prejudice. But there's no legal protection from people exercising prejudice, except where we have local ordinances. Okay. The argument was made that our amendments, which addressed this very issue when the bill was here in the most sincere way, after endless study, we had a few proposed amendments that would have made it clear that we weren't fooling with sexual orientation and we weren't fooling with civil rights. And they were turned down, and I learned today they were turned down because the language didn't quite fit. This is not about style or form, nor can this be about making our laws look like other states' laws. This is something that's going on here that's very, very destructive. I don't really care if the law of Utah or Arkansas is exactly like ours. I'm not in the business of copying. I'm in the business of representing Hoosiers. There are movements outside this building that want us all to adopt the same laws on certain points because they can have a scorecard. They can go to their donors in Washington and say, we got 10 states that have said the same thing. We're up to 15, give us more money. I'm not interested in that, and it hurts us because you're not listening to the people at this microphone, you're listening to the people who are raising money in Washington when you take that attitude. I sit on the Courts and Criminal Code Committee. I am stunned by how carefully we work to make sure our sentences are right and our laws make sense. We don't spend a lot of time worrying about whether West Virginia has the same sentence, because we know our state and we know our problems. We've got to get off of this national linguistic game, this scoring points so that we can be rated by some national organization. That's a threat to this institution. It has wreaked havoc on us. Now, I could have asked the speaker a lot of questions. I wrote down the questions, but I like him. And, and also, he'd probably give some pretty good answers. So I'm just going to sort of pose some of the questions that I might have liked to ask. When did the majority first see that this was a problem? Obviously, not during our amendment process. They either didn't notice or somehow were worried about the language. Did you notice this was a problem before the governor signed the bill? I have the sense that somebody noticed the problem because the signing suddenly went awful private. Was the governor advised? You're about to sign a mistake? Was he alert? Was he warned? By the way, I'm the first person here to mention the governor, I think. I think we heard about a prior governor. Is he going to sign this? Has he told us? I haven't heard one way or the other. Typically, we get direction on issues that the governor thinks is important. I can't ask you to agree that if our amendments had been approved, we wouldn't have had this problem. That's going to have to be decided by you and not by me. I'm troubled by the whole source of this problem, which is why the main reason I'm going to vote against it. There was no crisis in religious freedom in this state until we stirred this hornet's nest. The Republicans have had the governor's office for 10 years, and they haven't threatened our churches. And I doubt that Governor Bayh or Governor O'Bannon or Governor Kernan ever did, because we would have heard about it. So we create an artificial crisis, and then we create a solution. And then we ram it through this body. That's a bad process. Today's process is another bad process. We're passing a statute in less than 1 day. Oh my. The lawyers that I know have talked and read about it. We don't all read it the same way, so maybe it'll be grist for the mills. A repeal would have been better. Trust is important. I think that some of the trust in this institution and in the governor has been cut back, limited, hurt because of this whole process. What we're doing today will only confuse the rest of the world that cares about us. In my view, we're putting a small Band-Aid on a gaping wound. And that wound is our inability to finalize the issue of fair treatment for people of different sexual orientation or identity. I don't want my kids to fight that fight, so I'm going to spend the rest of this year making sure that this is on the agenda, and I invite the speaker to put it on the agenda and to have a committee hearing and meet here in this chamber like we've done on other issues and resolve this. I sat here today and I told you what the business leaders said. I want to answer them and say we're going to move forward. We're not stopping with today's fix. So, I could stand here and say some things about the governor that might not be the right thing. But it is time for leadership on his part. And I'm asking him to endorse a full and fair discussion of equality without regard to sexual orientation or identity. I want him to join in that discussion and to know that he may lose. He may lose, but he ought to be part of that discussion. There are two things, really, that I think people who feel that someone is prejudiced against them, there are really two things, ultimately, that they ask for. It's just two simple words. And those words are accept and protect. People who feel they're victims of discrimination, first, in a normal human way, want to feel accepted. And I appreciate the speaker's conversation with Greg Louganis. I have the sense that Mr. Louganis felt some acceptance, and that's a good thing. But the other thing people want is protection. So they want acceptance and protection. And that protection ultimately can only come from the law. And that's what we do. We're not there. We've started the discussion. I think the discussion is moving in the right direction. Voting for this particular fix will not advance that effort at all, but an honest discussion and an honest hearing of legislation in the next session will do that. It is possible, and I have had prepared amendments to put on bills that come up in the rest of this session. I have to decide whether that's the right thing to do. I have to decide whether it's right for the people in this chamber and in this state to go through more of this. It's been a long, hard couple of weeks. But I'm ready to do that. I don't know what the right thing to do is. I haven't been here before, nor have we. So I ask you all to vote against this proposal and to work for freedom for all over time. Thank you very much.